Trending today is the tragic story of EgyptAir flight MS-804, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions about what happened to this plane. The flight disappeared from radar last night over the Mediterranean Sea. 66 souls on board that flight, and the biggest question is, was this a terrorist act that took down this plane? Here with me now, retired FBI counterterrorism agent Tim Clemente. Tim, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Gina.
Tim, all we really know about this flight is that it disappeared over the Mediterranean Sea last night, and I hear some people saying this was definitely a terror attack. How can we be so sure?
Well, I think indications of what we do know. We know that the plane was acting or flying erratically before it went down. There were no indications that the crew was calling for help in any way. There were no distress signals. In the initial first few hours of the flight, they were crossing over the waypoints without any issues. The flight crew was very upbeat and actually thankful to the air traffic controllers they spoke to along the way as they were flying over Greece. But the last indications are that the plane made erratic and dramatic deceleration, turns, lost 20,000 feet or more of altitude. And those are indications that there's something tragically wrong. At 37,000 feet where the plane was flying, it's when a plane is at its safest. Usually they have more difficulty at takeoffs and landings. So the fact that this happened while it was at altitude without any warning means it was probably catastrophic, either A, a bomb, or B, some kind of a very, very bad malfunction that would cause a catastrophic failure of the aircraft, and or some member of the crew might have been involved. So the plane was either taken over or taken over by the crew itself, but something obviously went wrong.
The airport there in Paris let 70 people go because of their ties to terrorists, and that wasn't all that long ago, Tim. Knowing what you know about terror, what makes you think this was most likely terror, and is this really sort of a hotbed? Was this ripe for it, I guess? Was this particular area, this particular flight, more ripe for it than others?
Well, Gina, we've seen in the recent past where EgyptAir has been the target of other terrorist attacks. The Russian flight that was coming out of Egypt that was struck down by a bomb. And also we know that Paris itself, France, has been targeted several times in the last several years by groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and individuals acting in their stead. Obviously, this wouldn't be out of the norm for France to suffer a terrorist attack. What would be unusual is for ISIS or Al-Qaeda, those known groups that are fighting against France, not to take credit for something like this right away. It would be very unusual for them to take credit days later, because they never hesitate to take credit for something they've done, because they want that publicity. They want the fear to be known and associated with them. So that, I think, is kind of unusual. That leads me to believe it may not have been directly related to ISIS or Al-Qaeda. It may have been individuals wanting to, a lone wolf type attack, wanting to do something in their own name and not in the name of a terrorist group, or maybe in their death we'll find that there was a note or something left behind if it was in fact some member of the crew or somebody on the inside. And the reason I say that is I'm leaning towards that theory because France has a very good reputation in aviation security, and that aviation security is extremely heightened because of the recent terror attacks in France. So I find it very hard to believe that a passenger would very easily introduce an IED, an explosive device, onto the aircraft from Paris. It's possible, since this plane had 3 other legs earlier in the day from Egypt and other locations, that possibly something was introduced earlier in the day. But for it to have come in from France, that would be very difficult, and I think it would be something that ISIS would be jumping and screaming with joy and claiming responsibility for, if in fact they had done it.
Tim, today Donald Trump tweeted before there was any knowledge of there being anything to do with a terrorist attack. I guess we still don't frankly know, as you were pointing out. He tweeted that likely this was a terror attack and sort of went after this current administration for their softer stance on terror. Do you think that that was irresponsible for a presidential candidate?
Well, I don't know. Donald Trump is not one to hold his feelings in. He's well known for his tweets, very rash tweets. In this case, I can't say that this crash or whatever disaster befell this plane is directly responsible or a direct responsibility of President Barack Obama. I will say that I agree with Donald Trump, that this administration has not made terrorism very high on their priority list. They clearly thought that ISIS was a JV team and they weren't going to do anything about it until it was too late. And then when they did do something about it, they talked about containment. Yeah. The president routinely said, we're going to contain them. You don't contain a terrorist group like that that's murderous thugs. You eliminate them. And he had no intention of doing that, and still really has no intention of doing that, apparently, based on his actions while he's in office. So I can understand the frustration of somebody like Donald Trump, seeing that these attacks have increased in recent years. And though this one targeted primarily individuals from Europe and the Middle East, it's still something that affects the peace and serenity of the Western world, the civilized world. Mm-hmm. And so I can understand why Trump would be upset about that. I may not have said what he said, but that's a Trumpism.
Is the Muslim ban, is that a crazy idea on his part in light of this sort of terror, at least temporary, till we figure out how to stop the bleeding?
Well, I was talking to a Muslim buddy of mine from the Middle East just this afternoon about this incident with the aircraft, and we were talking about what Trump had said about a slowdown on Muslim immigration and not letting any new Muslims into the country until we can figure out who they are and what the problem is. And he completely agreed. He said, look, I have no problem with that. He said, these refugees can't be vetted. They're coming from places like Syria that have there's no mechanism in place to possibly vet a refugee from Syria. And my buddy's from, nearby in the Middle East, and he was saying, even his own country, if somebody was coming here from there are no records. It's not like being in America where you have all these databases, NCIC, you have driver's license databases, you have Social Security Administration, you have so many ways to look at who somebody is, do references, and clearly see.
So maybe halt it or at least slow it until we have a better mechanism in place.
Any problem with trying to look more closely and trying to truly vet people that are coming into this country.
That's interesting, especially coming from your Islamic friend, as you said. Tim, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and expertise on this. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you, Gina.
Up next.